So the controversial Welcome to Sex children's book has caused a real stir in Australia, and one retailer has removed it from the shelves. There's been an uproar over the graphic illustrations or sexual positions that are revealed in the masturbation, LGBTQI issues, and the anal sex, a move called scissoring. There's so much here. I don't even know. Look, I'm saying don't. Here we go. Here come the critics. Here they come. Why are you saying this stuff for? This is what's in the book. Drop the taboo. Drop the, ooh, too messy. This is what people talk about. This is on the internet, so now it's in a book. This is real life. The book, written by broadcaster Yumi Stynes, with teen magazine advice columnist Dr Melissa Kang. It covers sexual topics with illustrations, and before you freak out, they only recommend it to kids 14 and over. It tackles life's taboos, the stuff that mum and dad may not want to tell you. I don't remember hearing all this. It's a book that no one is forcing anyone to read. But it's causing a bit of a stir across the Tasman. Dr Melissa Kang joins us from Australia, and Melissa, it doesn't shy away from anything, does it? I mean, it really opens up this debate, Melissa.
Look, that's right. And what's changed in the world since you and I were teenagers, Duncan, is that young people can Google anything on their phones and will get all sorts of responses. Where the book came from, where the ideas came from, was that for many, many years, over 20 years, I used to answer questions that were written into a magazine called Dolly in Australia, and I believe it circulated in New Zealand as well. And so the questions, particularly some of the, as you say, the more graphic parts of the book, which was only about 20 pages, were directly coming from the questions that I used to get asked through the magazine, and some of those were very young readers. So what we tried to do in the book is really talk to lots of young people, so make sure we had up-to-date information about what young people were curious about, made sure we were talking about feelings, relationships, communication, where our ideas about sex come from in society, and how it's okay to have your own beliefs and values, but then also really just giving quite straightforward explanations, which were answers to the sorts of questions that I would get asked over and over and over.
It's also, I remember Dolly. I remember that in my sister. I had two sisters. I remember the magazine.
Yeah.
Do you think it? I mean, it talks about scissoring and it gives all sorts of illustrations. Is that necessary, or do you think that puts this stuff into the minds of young people too soon?
Well, all the research around giving young people accurate, evidence, information, scientific information, including about what sex is and the different ways that people might enjoy intimacy and physical contact, does not lead to, earlier taking up of sex, for example. In fact, the research suggests that if you give young people just accurate information, not trying to be, funny, or just kind of down-to-earth information, that in fact it helps them make more informed decisions about when they're ready. So the section that talked about different ways to have sex, and when we asked young people, well, what is sex to you? It was a whole lot of things. It was not just about, what I learned at school, which was about birds and bees and making babies. It all sorts of ways to be intimate, and even with yourself, for example, were considered to be sex. So we wanted to try to encompass the range of ideas that young people have about sex, what they think it is, what it means to them, and also to make sure that we catered to a diverse audience of young people.
When do you think we should be talking to our kids about sex for the first time?
I think it has to be what we call age appropriate. So it can, if we think about sex as any sort of physical intimacy between people, then we can role model that with young children simply through, displaying affection, talking about feelings, talking about what feels nice. And then we bring in, as they get older and their bodies start to change. I mean, that's, I think, when it becomes really critical, because once a child, adolescent starts to go through puberty, they also experience changes in the way they think, changes in the way they feel, and they certainly can start to experience what we would call as what I would call as the doctor arousal and those kinds of sexual feelings. So I think just simply giving young people information about what those feelings are and how they're, there's a wide variety of them, but they are quite natural. One of the most common questions I used to get from very young adolescents who wrote into the magazine anonymously was, I feel tingly, I feel horny, I don't know if this is normal. And they weren't having sex with anyone for many years to come, but just demystifying some of those natural, changes that are happening to the body and the way we think and feel about people was something that was important. It caused a lot of angst.
The internet has exploded, as we know. There's all sorts of things on there, and pornography's taken off. And in New Zealand, there's 150. If you sat down in New Zealand and watched porn until there was no porn left to watch, you'd be sitting down for 157 years. So the internet has exploded, right? In many ways, publishers have to keep up, and a publisher of traditional books have to keep up. And you go to libraries now, and very much the books are out of date. Things have replaced them, the internet. So is this also why you had to go as far as you could, because you had to keep up with what kids are getting anyway?
Yeah, that's right. And some of the research has shown that when young people access online pornography, whether they do it deliberately or accidentally, they're going to go for the pornographic sites that are free, that aren't going to cost them anything. So that's what we might call mainstream pornography. And that might be fine for adults, but for children and adolescents, we don't think that that's such a great idea, because they see very narrow expressions of, sexual intimacy between people. And it tends to be gearing towards almost violence. It tends to display behaviors and practices that young children and young people are way too young, in my opinion, to be thinking about or seeing. So we wanted the book to really go right back to the beginning and talk about those early feelings, that, how to understand what your body can do for yourself. And then when you start to sort of become interested in perhaps having some physical intimacy with another person, that you're aware that there's a whole range of different kinds of ways to enjoy intimacy. It's not just what you might see in free online porn sites.
You've had a bit of reaction to the book, obviously. There's been all sorts of reaction. I think the Big W, they've pulled it from the shelves. Dimics are under pressure. What does that tell you?
I think that there's certainly some backlash towards the book, which it's hard to know where that, it's coming from. Is it coming from a minority? Is it coming from a lot of parents? I think that what I say to people is, if you're an adult, a parent, a carer, read the book, look at all the content that surrounds those 20 pages in the middle or towards the second half of the book, and think about how you can start conversations with young people. I understand, obviously, that there are plenty of parents who feel like, no, children are too young to know this information. And when I say children, I'm talking about under 16, under 18. But all the evidence, certainly in Australia, but also around the world, suggests to us that young people are engaging in what I would call sexual activity. And that might be something like just some touching or some kissing. They start that very young. I mean, in Australia, the surveys that we've been running every 5 years for over 30 years now suggest that some of these early intimate behaviours start, as young as early high school.
It interests me too, because there's so much going on in our kids' heads, right? They're young and they're not developed yet. They're developing, but they're not developed yet. And so they have social media, they have devices coming out their ears, they have all this stuff coming out, all the pressures of modern society. Now there's this, and I just wonder, at what point do we say, let them be kids and let them, I mean, I agree. I have no problem with the book. Personally, I think, I'm going to go and grab it for my 13-year-old boy who's very interested in girls. So he needs some warnings. He needs to know about consent and all sorts of things, right? And we're teaching him this at the moment, but the book will be great. But, it's just so much for their brain to deal with, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, I think that there's a lot of, there's just so much information about anything, whether it's about sex and relationships or consent or something completely different. And I guess, things like mental health and just health in general, food, nutrition, all those kinds of health messages. There's so much information and misinformation. So a book isn't going to fix that. One book isn't going to change the world or fix that. But I think what it is a very thoroughly researched, I guess, up to date at the moment anyway, information about something that's been going on you know, since humans existed. So I suppose that's the other way to look at it.
It has been around a little while, hasn't it? Tell me, as my final question, some advice for people like myself, parents, and their kids are starting to get a little bit interested, 8, 9, 10, asking questions. What do we tell them?
Yeah. Well, we follow their lead. I think that's the most important thing. We're guided by what our children are asking. And what we know is that kids will switch off if the information we're giving them is not relevant to them. So if we talk about, well, sex, you know, sex to some people means how to make a baby, and it involves a penis going into a vagina. Or there's other ways to make babies. Or we can say, well, sex is just something that feels nice in your body. It makes you feel tingly, and it's something that people might discover by themselves, or they might discover it with someone else. It can be as simple as that. Or, you know, once they start perhaps getting to an age where they are thinking about dating, or you think, oh, yeah, they're going on their first dates, they're starting to show interest in more intimate relationships, then you might start to talk about, well, what sex can mean when you're in a relationship with someone. And you don't have to go through all the, I guess, different practices and that sort of thing, but but you can allude to that. And that's where I think having a resource, whether it's a book or whether it's a really good, credible website, then I think that's a good way to sort of bring in the conversation. Well, let's look at this resource together, or how about you go have a read of this and then we can talk about it.
Yeah, no, brilliant stuff. Hey, thank you so much for your time today, and all the best, and I look forward to the next one.